what if, uh, what if the most brilliant mathematical equations in human history, the ones we
Really?
literally use to define our physical universe, were actually written for the completely wrong reality?
I mean, it's the kind of question that really forces you to reevaluate, every single assumption you've ever made about the physical world.
Right.
Because if the foundational language is even just slightly misapplied, then everything built on top of it, our physics, our cosmology, our understanding of time itself, it all requires this massive fundamental structural translation.
And that is exactly the core of our deep dive today. We're looking at a 2026 work by George James Ducas. It's called the Transdimensional Unified Field Theory, or TDUFT.
Yeah, TDUFT.
And the mission of this specific framework is just, frankly, staggering. Ducas takes the legendary infinite equations of the mathematician Srinivasa Ramanujan equations that have, baffled and inspired mathematicians for over a century, and he systematically dismantles them.
He really does. He tears them right down to the studs.
Exactly. TDUFT argues that we have been taking math that belongs to a pre-creation, like a primordial realm, and we've been inappropriately forcing it onto our physical universe.
Right, forcing a square peg into a round hole, mathematically speaking.
Yeah. So to fix this, Ducas proposes replacing the mathematical constant pi, which, we all learned in grade school, with phi, the golden ratio. And by making that one substitution, the theory completely redefines velocity, time, entropy, and the very fabric of reality itself.
The implications are just massive. I mean, Ramanujan's original work is universally revered.
Oh, absolutely.
He produced these infinite series and modular forms that seem to just, fall out of the sky. They possess this innate, absolute, perfect symmetry.
Right, they're beautiful.
They are, but TDUFT introduces this strict, impenetrable boundary between two distinct domains of existence. So on one side, you have the primordial wave domain, this pre-creation realm of perfect symmetry, and then on the other side, you have the created physical universe.
The one you and I actually inhabit, the one you listening right now are sitting in.
Exactly, and the argument here is that Ramanujan's pi-based equations perfectly describe that first realm, the primordial one, but they fundamentally fail to describe the physical one without a really radical mathematical intervention.
So let's define those two realms, because I think this is where the split happens, and it's crucial. Pi versus phi. We are taught that pi is just this foundational law of geometry, right? It's the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. It represents perfect closed loops.
Right.
But TDUFT basically banishes pi from the physical universe.
Banishes is really the right word for it. In the TDUFT framework, pi belongs exclusively to that primordial wave domain.
Okay.
That domain operates on what Ducas calls pi closure. It is a mathematical system that closes perfectly upon itself. I mean, think of a perfect circle. It has no beginning, it has no end, and crucially, no physical manifestation.
It's just unbroken symmetry.
Exactly. Unbroken symmetry. But basic physics tells us that for matter, for energy, for physical reality to actually exist, symmetry must be broken.
Okay, so pi is the math of unbroken perfection, which means it literally cannot exist as a physical thing.
Correct. You can't touch pi. The original Ramanujan velocity expression uses pi extensively, and it often carries it through this modular parameter that mathematicians denote as q.
Right, the q parameter.
Yeah. Now, in complex analysis, q is typically defined as the exponential of 2 times pi times an imaginary number times a complex variable.
Which sounds incredibly complicated.
It is, but conceptually, it is a brilliant mechanism for exploring symmetrical, closed-loop spaces. The problem is, it keeps the math trapped in that primordial pi realm.
Ah, I see.
Right. If you attempt to apply Ramanujan's untouched q parameter directly to the physical universe, you are basically trying to force infinite, unbroken symmetry onto a realm that absolutely requires physical boundaries and directional growth.
So the physical universe, according to TDUFT, doesn't run on pi at all. It runs on phi, the golden ratio, roughly 1.618.
Emphatically, yes. This is a phi universe.
Yeah.
The golden ratio inherently governs recursive attenuation.
What does that mean, recursive attenuation?
It's the math of spirals, of geometric growth, of unfolding structures. Think about the arrangement of leaves on a stem.
Okay.
Or the spiral of a whole galaxy. It is directional, it's emergent, whereas a pi circle is completely static and contained.
So mixing them is a bad idea.
Right. Mixing primordial pi directly with physical phi is geometrically invalid. The structural languages just clash.
To put that in perspective for everyone, think about the architectural process of building a skyscraper. Pi is the architect's blueprint. The blueprint is theoretically perfect. The angles are exact, the lines are pure, And it exists entirely in this realm of abstract geometric symmetry, which is our primordial wave domain.
That's a great way to look at it.
But you cannot live inside a blueprint. To
Well,
create the actual skyscraper, you need the physical materials, right? The steel beams, the concrete, the glass.
yeah,
That physical manifestation is phi.
exactly.
So the blueprint is necessary to conceive the structure. But the moment you start pouring concrete, you are governed by the laws of friction, gravity, material resistance. You are governed by phi. You're in the real world.
The blueprint is the primordial condition before geometric closure, and Ducas makes this mathematical distinction absolute. The source material states explicitly that pi was completely removed from the active operator and placed in the primordial wave domain.
Placed in the primordial wave domain.
Okay.
But if pi is the blueprint and phi is the physical building, they still have to communicate somehow.
No.
I mean, the blueprint has to translate into reality. How does TDUFT handle that translation mathematically without just shattering the boundary between the two realms?
Well, that translation requires a very specific structural shift. As we said, you can't just erase pi and write phi in its place.
Right, that would just be lazy math.
Exactly. The text explains that to make the primordial pi expression interact with our universe, it actually has to be squared. Squaring pi produces pi squared, obviously, and in the TDUFT framework, pi squared is harmonic with phi.
Let's dig into that word harmonic, because it carries a lot of weight in physics, and we're not talking about musical chords here.
Right, no guitars involved. In a structural sense, harmonic means they can resonate within the same mathematical space without causing a total system collapse.
Okay.
By squaring pi, you transform it from a linear measure of a circle into an area, a surface. It becomes a higher dimensional platform.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and this harmonic relationship allows phi, which again is the geometry of physical growth, to actually exist within that pi squared realm. But phi cannot dominate there. Pi squared closure is still the master of the primordial domain.
So the original math is just sitting there in the blueprint phase.
Exactly. Therefore, Ramanujan's equation is fundamentally incorrect for the physical phi realm until it is physically dismantled and reconfigured for physical operation.
Which means taking some of the most beautiful mathematics ever written and basically performing radical surgery on it.
Yes, major surgery.
Ducas took Ramanujan's infinite modular product, pulled out the primordial pi, squared it, and created what he calls the Ducas-Ramanujan phi velocity operator.
That's the one.
But he didn't just change the constants, right? He altered the underlying engine of the equation itself.
He absolutely had to. And the most significant alteration happens in the denominator of Ramanujan's original modular product.
Okay, break that down for us.
So in the classical equation, there is a unity term, a standard number 1.
Right. And a 1 in a denominator usually signifies a baseline, like the whole equation rests on it.
Exactly. But in this theory, that 1 represents pi-based unity. It represents perfect, unbroken mathematical closure.
Ah, the perfect circle again.
Right. If a system is perfectly closed, it is completely self-contained. Energy doesn't leave, energy doesn't enter, nothing changes. And if nothing changes, physical reality cannot emerge.
Because physical reality is all about change.
Yes. The physical phi universe is not a perfectly closed mathematical loop. Ducas recognized that keeping the 1 meant the equation would forever describe a static, abstract universe. So he just removed it.
See, if you are looking at an equation that has survived rigorous mathematical scrutiny for a century, deleting the foundational 1 seems borderline heretical.
It's a huge move.
But a theory that claims to redefine the universe's engine is totally useless if it blows up on paper. He had to put something in its place to prevent the whole function from collapsing, right?
He did. He replaces that pi unity 1 with a highly specific phi geometric term. It's v to the power of 2n plus epsilon.
Okay, v to the 2n plus epsilon. Let's break that down, starting with the epsilon. Because reading through the source material, this seems to be the absolute linchpin of the entire transdimensional framework.
It really is. It is the defining feature of the physical universe in TDUFT. The source documents define this epsilon explicitly as the exact value of 0.00002007542.
Okay, 0.007542. I mean, that is incredibly specific. Where does that exact decimal even come from?
It is derived directly from the speed of light.
Wait, really?
Yeah. If you take an absolute baseline of 3.000000000 and you subtract the normalized speed of light in a vacuum, which is 2.997924458, you get exactly 0.000007542.
Oh, wow. So it's literally a speed of light deficit.
Precisely. The text calls this epsilon the entropy cost of dimensional emergence.
Entropy cost.
Yes. It is a universal constant in this framework. It shows up in velocity, thermal coherence, and transdimensional transport.
So let me make sure I'm getting this. By replacing the perfect one with this term containing a speed of light deficit, Ducas is essentially saying that the universe has a tax.
A tax. That's a good way to put it.
Like, for physical reality to exist at all, there's a mandatory emergence cost.
Mm.
If the equation stated a perfect one, it would remain a pure thought, completely trapped in the pi realm.
Exactly.
But by inserting epsilon, you force a tiny mathematical imperfection into the system. You basically force the math to bleed just a little bit, and that bleeding is what allows it to become physical reality.
And that concept completely upends our classical understanding of entropy. I mean, think about it. In traditional thermodynamics, entropy is the measure of a system's thermal energy per unit temperature that is unavailable for doing useful work. We often colloquially describe it as the inevitable progression from order to disorder, the arrow of time pointing toward decay.
Right. It's the classic example of the shattered coffee cup. It falls, it breaks, and it never spontaneously reassembles itself.
Exactly. The universe slowly dying. But TDUFT redefines this entirely. In this framework, the exponential base E, which classically represents continuous growth, is reinterpreted as an entropy carrier.
An entropy carrier.
Yeah. Entropy is no longer seen as chaos or the slow, inevitable death of the universe. It is the necessary dissipation that allows an infinite mathematical recursion to stabilize into a finite physical geometry.
Okay, let me try an analogy here. If we think about an internal combustion engine, classical entropy describes the friction, right? The wear and tear on the pistons, the heat lost to the environment, the things that ultimately make the engine break down over decades of use.
Right, the stuff that destroys the engine over time.
But TDUFT is arguing that entropy isn't the rust on the engine. Entropy is the exhaust pipe.
Oh, that's brilliant, yes.
It is the necessary byproduct of forward motion. If you plug the exhaust pipe, the engine chokes and dies immediately. So without that epsilon residue being constantly shed, the universe's mathematical recursion would just lock up.
That is an excellent structural parallel. Entropy is the exhaust of dimensional emergence. It is the precise residual produced when infinite symmetry becomes finite geometry. It is an absolute requirement for stability.
That's wild.
Without epsilon, the recursion in Ramanujan's modified equation would remain purely mathematical. It would fail to stabilize. But with epsilon, the recursion becomes physical, convergent, and essentially locked into the phi geometry.
But introducing a constant like epsilon, especially one derived from the speed of light, into an infinite recursive function seems super risky.
Oh, mathematically, it's terrifying.
Right. When you alter an infinite sum, it usually spirals out to infinity or crashes straight to zero. So did Ducas actually calculate the velocity of the universe using this new epsilon engine to see what happens? Like, did he run the numbers?
He did. The source material heavily documents what they call the fixed point test.
Okay, the fixed point test.
Yeah. This is the QED quod erat demonstrandum. It's the moment where all this abstract philosophy is subjected to a rigorous numerical fixed point iteration. They had to prove that this new Ducas-Ramanujan phi velocity operator actually defines a stable, convergent physical velocity.
How did that test work structurally? You have to start with an input, right? Like a seed number.
You do. You need an initial guess to seed the equation, which they denote as V0. And because this theory posits that we live in a phi universe, the logical starting point, the sort of geometric ceiling of the space, is the golden ratio itself.
Makes sense.
So they set V0 to approximately 1.618.
So they feed 1.618 into this massive infinite equation that now has the epsilon exhaust built right into its denominator.
Right. Now, because this is an infinite product that includes a v to the second term, the value grows incredibly fast as n increases.
Because of the exponent.
Exactly. But because that massive growth is located in the denominator, the actual value of each subsequent term in the series decays rapidly.
Oh, I see. So it attenuates. The impact of the higher dimensions gets smaller and smaller as you go down the line.
Substantially. So when you evaluate the first term, where n equals 1, you square the initial 1.618, you add the epsilon, and you run the calculation. The result of that first fractional term is roughly 0.3817.
Okay.
Then, for the second term, where n equals 2, the velocity term is raised to the fourth power. The result of that term drops to about 0.00729.
That's a big drop.
And by the third term, raised to the sixth power, it's 0.0185. It just keeps stepping down.
So the rapid decay means you don't actually have to calculate all the way to infinity to see where the equation is going. It converges on a limit.
Yes, exactly. The sequence of partial sums rapidly condenses. When they complete the calculation, factoring in the exponential entropy carrier and the initial phi constant, the new emergent velocity, which is v1, calculates out to approximately 2.005.
2.005. And the significance of that number isn't just the specific value itself, it's the fact that it stopped.
It stopped. That is the crucial mathematical victory here. The number is finite, it is stable, it is non-divergent.
It didn't blow up.
The operator did not blow up, it didn't collapse, and it didn't oscillate wildly between extremes, which, by the way, is what usually happens when you force a nonlinear dynamic equation out of its natural domain.
Right.
It behaved exactly like a well-posed, convergent phi-recursive velocity operator should.
The physical implication of that is just staggering to me. The universe is using this exact, highly specific mathematical mechanism to prevent itself from literally shaking apart.
Yes.
It is constantly breaking itself, using that 0.00207542 epsilon residue. It sheds exactly that much entropy so that reality remains stable at a convergent velocity. I mean, it calculates its own stability continuously, dimension by dimension, so that matter can hold its shape.
This QED demonstrates that velocity is not just a measure of distance over time. In TDUFT, velocity emerges as a stable fixed point of infinite dimensional recursion. The math literally proves the structural philosophy.
But wait, this introduces a massive physical question. If this equation generates the underlying fundamental velocity of the universe, this stable 2.005, how did that interact with the speed of light? Because classical physics treats the speed of light in a vacuum as the absolute immutable speed limit of the universe. Does this new PDUFT velocity supersede it? Do they conflict with each other?
The framework addresses this by identifying three distinct fundamental operators that govern all motion in the universe.
It's a triad.
A triad, okay.
First, you have the new phi-velocity operator we just discussed. Second, you have a phi-time operator. And third, you have the C1's electromagnetic light equation.
So velocity, time, and light.
Exactly. And the most critical distinction the expert text makes is that these operators do not merge into one unified mega equation.
They don't.
No. There isn't a single master equation that calculates all three simultaneously. They exist alongside each other, and they each govern a distinct geometric role within the lattice of the universe. Let's look at the mechanics of those roles then. We know the velocity operator governs expansion. You mentioned earlier that the v-time to the second term acts as an expansion attractor, pushing outward dimension by dimension. But how does TDUFT define the mathematical role of time?
The phi-time operator is derived from another of Ramanujan's famous structures, the Rogers-Ramanujan continued fraction.
A continued fraction. Okay, for those who might not remember algebra, that's a mathematical expression where a number is represented as the sum of its integer part and the reciprocal of another number, which is itself the sum of an integer and a reciprocal, and it just goes on infinitely.
Yes, it cascades. And structurally, continued fractions are fascinating because they provide a sequence of rational approximations that never perfectly resolve.
They just keep going.
They infinitely approach a value. In TDUFT, this infinite cascading mathematical structure represents recursive descent. Time diffuses, dimension by dimension, through the geometric lattice using this continued fraction recursion.
That makes profound physical sense when you think about it. Time isn't a straight line, it's a diffusion. It's stepping down through the geometry of reality, fraction by fraction.
Exactly.
So if velocity is the expansion pushing outward, and time is the dimensional descent stepping downward, where does the speed of light fit into the triad?
The light equation, the CTNs, governs the photon plane boundary. It operates effectively as a Dirichlet boundary condition.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning it does not dictate the internal geometric unfolding like velocity and time do. Instead, it defines the absolute electromagnetic limit of the system.
So if we visualize this, velocity and time are like the internal engine of a car. Velocity provides the forward thrust of the system, expanding it. Time provides the gearing, diffusing that energy down through the dimensional lattice. And the speed of light is the absolute, unyielding containment field holding the entire system together. It's the concrete wall of the highway.
It is the boundary constraint. But, and this is key, they are completely interdependent. The text states that the stable velocity derived from the Ramanujan rewrite, that 2.005 number, actually acts as the fundamental carrier that feeds into the speed of light equation.
Wait, so velocity is feeding the speed limit?
Yes. The Ramanujan-derived velocity provides the stable underlying geometric scale that the electromagnetic expression of light is built upon. Velocity and time move together, shifting dimension per dimension, and entropy, that epsilon we talked about, is the exhaust left by their joint mechanical motion.
Wow.
They form a continuous unified attenuation engine, but their internal motion never violates the electromagnetic boundary of light.
So they form an ecosystem, they maintain their distinct mathematical structures, but they totally rely on each other for the universe to function.
Perfectly said.
But if you have these three massive operators working in tandem like that, there has to be a foundational link, right? What forces velocity and time to work together in the first place? Is there a specific point of origin?
There is, and it is arguably the most fundamental equation in the entire TDU-FT framework. It is the hinge upon which the primordial and physical realms turn. It is called the eternum nexus, or the creation invariant.
The eternum nexus. That sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. How is it actually written mathematically?
The equation is 1/2 times the quantity of alpha times phi plus beta times psi all squared equals pi squared.
Okay, let's dissect that slowly.
Right.
1/2 times the quantity of alpha times phi plus beta times psi, and that whole quantity is squared,
Right.
and it all equals pi squared.
Right.
We know phi is the golden ratio. Alpha and beta would just be standard scaling factors or state
Yeah.
vectors, right? But what is psi?
Psi is the mathematical conjugate to phi, and the eternum nexus carries a mandatory conjugate constraint that literally defines the physics of the entire system, which is phi times psi equals -1.
Phi times psi equals -1. Okay, why does a -1 force physical manifestation?
In mathematics, multiplying two values to equal -1 implies a complete directional opposition. It often represents an orthogonal relationship or a phase shift.
Like they're pulling in opposite directions.
Yes. In this framework, it is the unbreakable seal of creation. Phi represents velocity, which is expansion. Psi represents time, which is contraction or recursive descent. By binding them with a conjugate constraint of -1, the framework locks them in fundamental opposition.
So they are literally forced to pull against each other continuously.
Yes. And that constant opposition generates the harmonic tension required for the physical universe to emerge.
Oh, I get it. If they weren't mathematically opposed, there would be no friction.
Exactly. No friction, no epsilon generated. The system would just collapse back into pure, unmanifested symmetry. The tension is what forces manifestation.
And the entire left side of that equation is squared, and it equals pi squared. We are back to pi.
But importantly, it is pi square. Remember, the primordial wave domain is governed by pi.
Like the blueprint.
To interact with the physical phi universe, to create that harmonic resonance we talked about, it had to be squared, transforming it from a linear measure into a spatial one. The eternum nexus equals pi squared because it is the structural bridge.
A bridge between the two realms.
Yes, it is the absolute final operator of the primordial pi domain and the very first operator of the realized phi universe.
It is the mathematical moment of creation.
Yeah.
Everything in our universe, the velocity expanding outward, time diffusing downward, the electromagnetic boundary of light, it all hangs on this one specific equation, balancing expansion and contraction against the blueprint of the primordial realm.
And the way that bridge actually unfolds into our physical reality is deeply, profoundly geometric. To explain this dimensional unfolding, the source material points back to yet another of Ramanujan's brilliant structures.
Which one?
His infinite nested radical.
A nested radical. Okay, I remember this one. This is a square root that contains a number plus another square root, which contains another number plus another square root, going on infinitely.
Exactly. Ramanujan's most famous nested radical cascades using sequential integers. 1, 2, 3, 4, nested infinitely deep within the square roots.
Right. Classically, this is viewed as this elegant analytical puzzle, isn't it? It evaluates to a specific number, but it's largely treated as abstract mathematics.
It is, but TDUFT doesn't treat math as abstract. It treats it as structural reality.
So what does Ducas do with it?
Ducas substitutes the result of that classical radical with physical velocity. And when he applies this to the phi universe, those cascading integers, the 1, 2, 3, 4, they cease to be mere counting numbers. They represent successive geometric dimensions physically activating within the lattice of the universe.
Wait. The integers in the mathematical equation literally dictate the physical activation of dimensions.
Yes.
How does that even work?
The leading one represents the primordial one-dimensional wave. As the function calculates the nested square roots, each subsequent integer represents the activation of the next geometric dimension. The square roots themselves serve as successive dimensional lifts, stepping the geometry up from a line to a plane to a volume and beyond.
It's like a fractal antenna.
Oh, that's interesting. How so?
In a fractal antenna, the geometry repeats at different scales, which allows it to receive multiple different electromagnetic frequencies simultaneously, depending on the scale of the iteration. Here, it sounds like the universe is mathematically iterating through a fractal sequence, and every time it hits a new integer in the nested radical, it activates a new dimensional bandwidth.
That is a phenomenal mechanistic analogy. It is a dimensional ladder, unfolding layer by layer. And because this entire sequence is fundamentally governed by the Ducas Ramanujan 5 velocity operator, every single step of that ladder is perfectly stabilized by the golden ratio.
Yeah.
That is how physical reality emerges from pure geometric potential.
That reframes the entire concept of space for me. I mean, space around us isn't just an empty void that matter happens to sit inside. Space itself is a dimensional structure that is being actively and continuously calculated through this perfect mathematical recursion. The universe is literally computing its own volume.
Exactly. And that profound physics transition from an empty void to an actively calculated, mathematically flawless lattice leads us directly into the ultimate philosophical claim of the TDUFT framework.
And this is where things get really paradigm shifting.
They do, because if the universe operates on this level of exact mathematical recursion, we have to totally reconsider what we perceive as flaws in reality. We have to discuss the myth of chaos.
Yeah. The source text makes a definitive, uncompromising statement about this. It says, chaos is a myth and defect is a myth. This universe is perfect mathematics, never implying corruption or imperfection.
It is a radical departure from how human beings experience reality. I mean, we observe things breaking all the time. Systems fail. Matter decays. We built the entire classical concept of entropy around the idea of unavoidable degradation.
Right.
But in the TDUFT framework, what we call disorder or decay simply does not exist at the foundational geometric level.
But okay, let's play devil's advocate. If I drop a glass right now and it shatters on the floor, my human perception sees a transition from order to chaos. A perfectly good object is now violently disorganized on my kitchen floor.
Yeah.
How does TDUFT view that shattered glass?
It views it as a harmonic adjustment of scale.
A harmonic adjustment.
Yes. There are no flaws in the mathematical lattice. The glass shattering is simply matter shifting its dimensional and energetic state to remain in balance with the continuous attenuation engine of the universe. The energy hasn't degraded into chaos. It has been redistributed perfectly according to the strict geometric laws of phi.
So when operators transition from the primordial wave domain into physical reality, symmetry must be broken to create form. The text actually calls this transition from 0 to 1, squaring the circle.
Yes, moving from the infinite potential of the pi circle to the physical manifestation of the squared universe. In that transition, the perfect unity of the pi realm breaks into phi and psi velocity and time, geometry, and wave. And as they interact, they generate epsilon.
The exhaust.
The exhaust. And this is where the text introduces a deeply poetic interpretation of entropy. It states that entropy is, quote, God's present will, present and transcending all things.
That is heavy.
It is.
But removing the religious connotation for a second, structurally it implies that entropy is not the enemy of the universe. It is the active balancing force.
Exactly. It is the harmonic attenuation that allows infinite symmetry to actually manifest as finite geometry, the universal breaking system. With all that perceived decay, everything would instantly snap back into unbroken, unmanifested symmetry.
So every time a star burns out, every time a glass shatters, every time time moves forward, it's not a defect. It is the universe shedding exactly the right amount of exhaust to keep the multidimensional structure perfectly balanced.
Right.
Nothing is actually broken. We are just observing a boundless, infinite geometric fractal, continuously calculating its own equilibrium.
The source material describes the universe exactly that way. It says, the multidimensional lattice is infinite yet contained. It is bandless yet structured. It is fractal yet coherent. The idea of chaos only arises because our perception is severely limited to our specific dimensional bandwidth. We can't see the full math, so we assume the math is broken. TDUFT asserts the math is flawless.
It fundamentally changes how you interface with the world. To look around and know that beneath the surface noise, beneath the daily grind, there is an unbreakable, hyper-elegant rhythm governing every single interaction.
It's a beautiful way to look at reality.
Let's trace the arc of what we've uncovered today, because the scale of this theory is just massive. We started by looking at the primordial blueprint realm governed by pi, domain of unbroken perfect symmetry. We watched George James Ducas perform radical surgery on Srinivasa Ramanujan's legendary equations, literally tearing out the pi-based unity because a physical universe cannot exist inside a closed loop.
Right. And then we examine the epsilon engine, the insertion of that 0.0007542 speed of light deficit. It transformed our understanding of entropy from cosmic decay into the mandatory emergence cost, the essential exhaust of reality.
Right, the exhaust pipe of the universe.
And we saw that mechanism proved through the QED fixed point test, proving that the universe mathematically breaks itself to a stable velocity of 2.005.
Then we broke down the triad of motion velocity expanding outward, time diffusing downward through a continued fraction, and the speed of light maintaining the absolute electromagnetic boundary. We saw them locked together by the eternum nexus, perfectly balancing expansion and contraction with that -1 conjugate constraint.
Yeah, that tension.
And finally, we climbed the dimensional ladder of the nested radical, watching physical space compute itself into existence, leading us to the realization that chaos is merely an illusion of our limited perspective.
It's incredibly comprehensive.
It is a theory that replaces a cold, random universe with a perfectly tuned, self-correcting mathematical organism. But there is one final thought that this framework leaves unresolved, and it's something I want you, the listener, to ponder long after this deep dive ends. We learned today that our physical manifested universe operates entirely on the golden ratio, phi. It is the bricks and mortar of reality. And we learned that pi, the mathematics of perfect circles and absolute unbroken symmetry, was banished to the primordial pre-creation wave domain. It is the blueprint.
Right, the untouchable realm.
But if our physical reality is the house built with phi, who or what currently resides in that primordial blueprint realm of pi? I mean, if it is a realm of pure, unbroken potential where physical matter cannot exist, is that the domain of pure thought? Is it the mathematical origin of consciousness itself, completely untethered from the friction of the physical world?
It forces us to ask, if the pi realm is the original source code, what is the exact nature of the space where that code was written?
Something to think about next time you drop a glass or look at the spiral of a leaf or just stare up at the night sky. There is a hidden, perfect mathematics running beneath it all, and it is holding you exactly where you need to be. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of reality. We'll see you next time.